I want to talk a minute about the HTML tag called form. I have a fairly basic HTML page here. It's got an HTML tag and an end HTML tag. They come in pairs. It's got a body tag and an end body tag. It also comes in pairs. The form tag does the same thing. I got an open form tag and a close form tag. It comes in pairs. Inside of that form, I have a button and an end button tag. It comes in pairs. One of the oddities is this input type text box. It's the thing, let me bring up the browser window. It's the thing that generates a input box or a text box like this one, where people type into. The code that you see on the page over here is what is used to generate this web page here. Inside of this HTML page, I've got a body and then a form inside of it. You can't see anything that is a form, but you can see the input box of type text. What's on line 4 here is generated this input box here. The button to the right of it is generated with this HTML button submit. If I right click on my web page and I click view source, I'm going to look at what the browser thinks the HTML that it used to render that page looks like. This is the HTML it said that made this page. If I go over here, it looks an awful lot like, if not exactly like, the source the code that I wrote over here to render that. This is raw HTML. If I close my view source, the button has the word submit on it because I use the word submit here. If I change this to Steve and save it and refresh my browser, change the button text to Steve, I'm going to change it back to the word submit. The input tag doesn't have its own closing tag. It's self-closing. It has that / that is typically in an end tag inside of itself. So I have the input tag and this attribute saying that input is saying that this is a text box. The type is text. And it ends itself by putting the / inside of its own open tag. I don't know if it's possible, but we can try to see if we have an end input. Probably will be wrong. It says, hey, a closing tag was supplied for a self-closing element. So you need to remove this closing tag. I'm going to save it anyway and render, see what happens over here. So the browser was probably friendly enough to go ahead and render it like it thinks you really wanted it to. If I look at the view source, it even has an open tag and then close input tag. But probably by spec, meaning the rules for HTML, you shouldn't have a end input tag. And it's hard to know which ones are self-closing and which ones aren't. Visual Studio was nice enough to tell me that this one is self-closing. But more importantly now is this form tag. What the form tag does is it says when somebody finally goes to click the submit button, I'm going to send whatever value is in this text field here back to the server that hosted this website, back to the person who wrote the code for this website. So if I put in my username, Steve Kennedy is my username, and I hit submit, it's going to send this value to the server. This isn't exactly the markup you use for a submit button necessarily, but I wanted to prove a point of just the concept of you click a button, you have some value that the user's typed in here. How does that get back to the server? Well, you wrap it in a form tag. And this form tag has a lot of attributes on it. One which is called action. And where you can say, I want you to send that information to my server to a page called login.html and or login.php or some other page on my server that understands what to do with this value that you sent it. There was a lot there, so I'm going to go through it again. The form tag is what makes, and then here's the end form tag. The form tag is what makes it possible for when you click the submit button to submit this form, that it sends the value of whatever you put in this text box for it to go to the server. Without this form tag, it's going to look the same. I'm going to take the form tags out. I'm going to save it. I'm going to refresh. And it looks exactly the same. But if I click this and I click that button, it doesn't go to the server. It's just going to sit there doing nothing until I use those form tags. Now, if you're doing this in real life, you're probably going to need an action to send that, meaning I'm going to send that data to another page. And you probably won't be able to use very easily this button syntax. It's a different markup for a submit button. But again, I'm just trying to show the concept of you have a button and you have a text box, which is called an input box, or it's generated by the input tag with an attribute of type equals text, or an attribute of type that is set to the value of text that's used to generate this screen. The form tag is instrumental and required if you want to send data back to the server using this kind of simple method of doing it. There's many ways to get this data to go to the server, and you'll have a lot of experts. I'll have a lot of experts telling me all the nuances, but just for the simplicity of trying to convey this concept, you must have a form tag around the elements that the information that you want to send back to the server. Let's say I gave my input box a name, and I'm going to call it first name. And I have another, I'm going to duplicate this, I'm going to have another text box that is last name. And I save it and I refresh over here. This box is called first name, this box is called second name, and when I click submit, it's going to send the word, like if I put in Bob Smith in here, it's going to send the server, back to the server, it'll send the value of Bob and the value of Smith so that the server can do something with that data. But this is just the construct of an HTML document that creates input boxes, text boxes, that creates buttons, that sends the data, the values of these boxes back to the server because it has the form tag. Hopefully that has you understand how valuable these form tags are. Without the form tags, you're not sending data back to the server. You must have the form tags in order to send whatever data that they typed into these boxes back to the server when they click the submit button.